Anyway, this is Valley View, and welcome to this edition. And I'm your host, Ken Adams. And joining us this week are Ryan Hart, Cindy Kimball, and Chris Hagan, all from the Salem Progressive Film Series here in beautiful downtown Salem. And, you know, it's kind of interesting because I went during the October show earlier this month, and it was on soil. And I was kind of interested in soil conservation when I was late high school, early college. And so I thought, well, there'll be a few people there. And I was shocked. There was the theater was practically packed with people watching a show on soil. So I was totally impressed and wanted to have them come on and talk a little bit about the history of the film series and where it's going and so on. So anyway, here they are. And Cindy, you can probably tell us more about the history of the film series. So
yes, well, thank you for having us, Ken. And I just wanted to say something about that film. Wasn't it a beautiful film, though?
It
Symphony
was.
of the Soil?
It was.
Very artistic as well as educational. I really liked it.
Yeah, I very much appreciate it. and one of the things, too, I tell people, too, like growing up in Oklahoma and Kansas and seeing the soil just blow down the road,
right.
You understand that it's a very important thing, too.
Right, right. And I don't think we realize that out here in Oregon. We have this great soil in the Willamette Valley.
Yeah.
You can't even imagine what it's like, you know, in Oklahoma or places like that where it's wind
because
blowing.
like even when I was growing up in the late 40s, early 50s, you'd still see horrendous dust storms. Like I couldn't see across the street. And actually I was kind of reminded about how important soil was because I went to a demonstration of the headwaters in Northern California and I saw this huge mudslide because they had clear-cut a mountainside and it had buried these homes in like 2 to 3 feet of mud. And the only thing that really stopped the slide was Highway 101, the on-ramp.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it was, you know, so soil is a very important subject. So, you know, and it was a very well done film. I must admit.
Yes, I thought it was very good too.
Yeah.
So I don't mean to distract you, but so the history of the Salem Progressive Film Series. So it started in 2007. In the summer of 2007, a bunch of us got together. Well, it was mostly the owners of the Grand Theater and myself, and we were talking about how can you get points across to people how important it is to become active. And we thought maybe through film we could do that. And Carol Smith and Eric Kittleson had just remodeled the Grand Theater, and they were ready to use it. And we thought, well, what if we had a film series, and then we had speakers and an audience discussion. So Carol and Eric were very much a part of, they were major sponsors in the very beginning. And I think the very first 4 months they actually gave us the theater for free. And so we, with this little group of people, we decided we would send a letter out to friends and family asking them for support because we had no money. and also to talk, we just kind of talked up the idea to a group and had about 7 people involved in it. And throughout the summer, I got together with Ed Taylor and Carol Smith, and we just worked on it. How do you advertise? What film should we have? What speakers should we have? And we started in September 2007 with War Made Easy. And advertising, of course, is a big thing. How do you get the word out? How do you tell people? How do you get them to know it's going to happen? So we made these little tiny quarter sheets, which we still do today.
Yeah, just like that.
We're a very low budget film series. Yeah, and we hand them out after each film for the next film, so everybody knows what's happening next. You can put it on your refrigerator. But we made those originally, and we put them everywhere. We went to every single event and passed them out. The whole goal behind it was to motivate people to get active in the community, not just to see an issue that's a problem and then not do anything about it, but actually become active. And sometimes you don't know how to get active, and so if you give people ways to get after you, if you give them phone numbers, websites, emails, if you tell them how to do it and they're concerned enough, they'll become active, and that's what we found.
Yeah, because quite often I'd see in like, they'd have speakers come in and talk about various subjects and like that, but then they don't leave people with any then outlet for it. And quite often they'd have maybe some Q&A afterwards or something like that. But it didn't help them become active, like you're saying. It didn't lead them to where they needed to go.
Right.
So that's an important part of the film series.
And we have always, from day one, had a resource sheet that everybody would receive when they walk through the door as well. And the resource sheet has information about the film, information about the speakers, books about the film topic, websites about the film topic, action steps, what they can do if they need to write their legislators, if they need to write their city councilors, how to do that. Because lots of times people just don't know how to do it, as well as sometimes talking points. So, of course, we are a little bit, teeny tiny bit biased, but only a tiny bit.
Well, yeah, I mean, you do have a certain point of view because it is the Salem Progressive Film Series.
Right.
But, you know, that's not a bad thing.
No, and soil is not necessarily a progressive. It's a everybody issue. I think everybody's progressive on that issue.
Mm-hmm. Well, sometimes you'll find that some of the large farming concerns aren't really concerned about topsoil, amazingly enough. And but I mean, it's something that does need to be protected, and that we lose quite a bit of topsoil every year going down the Mississippi River, frankly, from various farming practices that are done in the Midwest. So anyway, that's kind of the history, the beginnings of it. And so how do you pick films? How do you go about choosing which films you're going to show? And Brian, you can enlighten us on that part?
Yeah, absolutely. Picking the films is really one of the funnest parts about the film series. It's also kind of the hardest because as the years, before, I think in the early stages, I think I've been with the film series 5 years now, or
something like that.
5 or 6, 5.5, something like that. And even just 5 years ago, it was hard to find good films. There wasn't that many out there. But I think documentaries in general have really, they've become more popular in mainstream, which means that they actually generate revenue for filmmakers, which means the more filmmakers make better films, and make more films. So lately, we've been having a lot easier time. In fact, a lot of the beginning in summer, when we're kind of picking out our schedule, it's been difficult. The last 2 years, we've had 20 films that we really liked that we had to pare down to like 9.
Yeah. As I said, it's been easy to find films, but it's been hard to find the ones that we want.
Right.
And get that list of the few.
Yeah, we want a variety, of different topics, and we kind of look at the past years and what we've had and what people liked. And we don't want to be too much the same, but we want to have things that people are looking for. But I also go to Sundance every year. I volunteered for the last, I don't know how long, 14, 15 years. And now I go there specifically searching out for a lot of the progressive documentaries out there, or just any documentary really that I think that would be good for our community that we could relate to.
One of the reasons too, I think, this is my personal opinion about why documentaries are more popular today, is because there's no news on television anymore. I mean, it's basically entertainment.
Yeah.
And I mean, I got kind of upset this last summer because they spent so much time talking about the royal baby. I mean, that is not news. That's entertainment.
Right.
And so there's, I think, a real need for documentaries today because there really isn't a whole lot of good sources on television anymore for that.
And they delve in deep into the topic. Yeah, Brian is very good about going to Sundance and finding films. And last February or January when you're there, he was texting me saying, "Oh my gosh, I just saw this fabulous film. We've got to show it next year."
Yeah.
And which film was that?
Well, I think it was Citizen Coke.
Citizen Coke, yeah.
And maybe
and
Inequality
for All, which
are
both
coming
on
up.
our docket. Yeah. So yeah, it's nice that as we've grown, we've been able to get these bigger films too, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But just the quality of films has really improved lately. And I know also when I'm at Sundance, every year Robert Redford gives his kind of address to the filmmakers and the press there, and every year he talks about documentaries and how important they are and how we have to have more of them and have more support for them. So it's kind of a movement that's started, I think, like I've said, in the last 5 years, which is great for us because we're seeing a lot of really well-made films.
A lot of times they're structured in such a way that they're a good story as well. It's not that they're just giving you all this information. There's kind of a storyline that you can kind of follow along, which I think makes it easier for people to absorb.
Absolutely.
Because then there's certain things that trigger memories a lot easier if there's a story
absolutely.
involved.
When the audience can relate to an issue specifically, I think it really hits home, you know, and a lot of these movies are very emotional and very real to people,
Well,
which
we
is
want
great.
we want them to resonate with it. We hope that the films we pick are ones that are important in our community as well as maybe the state of Oregon or the whole country. It's hard to resonate with something that's happening in India, though we are concerned about it, but we can't get people to do anything about it necessarily. So then if we have a speaker that can bring the whole topic home to Salem, Oregon, then people might actually do something. So
Yeah, reading about something happening to 1 million people overseas doesn't trigger the same response as hearing one person's story and being able to see that on a big screen and being able to hear, the issues and how it's affecting an individual. I mean, that really connects people emotionally to an issue, and that's what spurs people to take action.
So we've heard a little bit about, how you pick films, and so Chris, you know a little bit about the next film that we're going to be seeing here in the film series, and maybe you could talk about that, because this show will be airing for the next couple of weeks, and so if somebody's interested in going, then they'll know exactly what they got in store.
Yeah, so our next film is November 14th. It's called A Fierce Green Fire, The Battle for a Living Planet. And it's kind of a history of the environmental movement, all the way back to the conservation movement that helped start the state park or the national park system, all the way up to the present day and the fight against climate change. And it really kind of draws a straight line from those early environmental issues, which were kind of regional and focused on specific areas, to what we're fighting now, which is really a global sort of battle against climate change. It's a great film narrated by some really big players like Robert Redford, Meryl Streep, and a lot of other well-known actors. And what's special for us is that we're actually going to have the filmmaker Mark Kitchell as part of our discussion. He's making a big tour through the Northwest, and we are lucky enough to be a part of that. We'll also have Laura Stevens, who's a field organizer for the Sierra Club's Beyond Coal campaign, as part of the discussion. So not only is it going to be a really great film, but there's going to be a really kind of special opportunity for discussion.
And a way to bring it home to Salem.
Yeah,
You're
exactly.
talking about the coal train.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
And I think that's kind of what we try to do. We have these films, but we really try to bring them home. And I think that's what the best part about having speakers at our events. It's one of my favorite things, is that it really brings it into that local aspect. We have experts from our area talking about these issues. And sometimes what's great is they'll say, oh, I don't necessarily agree with this one part of the film, but here's what I think about it and how it relates to us. So even though, and with the Q&A, there's a lot of open discussion about that kind of thing, which I think makes it really special, the film series. Yeah.
And then we also have, especially with this film is a good example, we have tables in the lobby. It's so people go to the film, they listen to the speakers, it's an audience discussion, and then afterwards there's tables in the lobbies with different groups who are either represented in the film or else they
Or kind of related to
they're
that
related
subject.
to the film. So this time we'll have a number of environmental organizations will have tables in the lobby, and then LifeSource graciously provides snacks for us afterwards. So people can mingle with the people who have the tables and then have something to eat, and then they can talk to each other. So it's kind of a big community raising.
It's a social
awareness
event as well.
raising.
Yeah,
Social,
absolutely.
It's like we throw a big party
Yeah.
once a month. That's what it's like.
Well, I mean, that also helps reinforce people to become active, because they feel
Right.
connected
Right.
to the group.
And to each other.
Right. And I found that, like in a lot of volunteer kind of things, that if people feel connected to the other people in the group, and it creates a much stronger bond, and they're going to show up to do things and become actually usually more active. So that's sometimes overlooked in a lot of these groups. They kind of forget that social interaction part that I think is necessary in cementing people into an organization or into actual action.
Yeah, and the other thing I've noticed, I've only been a part of the board for a year and a half, 2 years now. But
we are happy to have you.
Thank you so much. But no, and even after our discussion, people will meet in the lobby, and you see people connecting who have similar views, but maybe didn't know that this other organization existed. And you see people starting to form, new connections and new possibilities to go out and you kind of push that action forward in the world, which is it was just great to see that kind of network forming.
Sometimes it carried on after the doors were closed and there were still people
That's
walking
right.
out on
Yes,
the sidewalk.
exactly. Yeah.
We have been known to flick the lights and
Yeah.
come back at 10:30 at night when we're ready to go.
That's
Yeah, I had to turn off someone's microphone last film. But
But I mean, that is, I was just so totally impressed with how many people showed up and how engaged they were. And you also had some really good music before the show even
Yeah.
started.
We are so fortunate to have Bill Hughes.
Yeah.
He volunteers his time. He now lives in Portland. He comes down, plays at the film series on stage for 30 minutes. So from 6:30 to 7 he plays. And then from there at 7 o'clock he goes to Boone's Treasury and plays there. But he's so kind to do
Yeah,
that. It's
he's
really
great.
great.
Well, it's very entertaining too. He
Yeah.
played very nice guitar, and
Yeah.
I mean, while people are gathering, you got this really nice music going on.
Right,
So
right, and they can look at the tables in the lobby ahead of time and talk to the people who represent different organizations, either ahead of time, when the music is still
Right.
playing, or they can go in and sit and they can watch the loop video that has information about the film, information about the next film and the speakers, as well as little trivia questions
Yep.
and lots of things that they can learn. So they can,
trivia questions, yes. So, where do you see the film series going in the future? I mean, what are your hopes for the film series? What's the next step?
Well, I know we would like to have probably another board member, right? That's one
Yeah,
thing, right?
that's true.
We would like to have another board member that could.
This
maybe,
is the complete board right here, right?
Yeah.
This is
Yes,
it,
it is.
right,
This is
right.
everything.
We are very fortunate to have some volunteers who
Yes, we have a lot of great
sit at the
volunteers.
table and take their $4 or $3 from people, as well as somebody who helps create the resource sheet that we hand out. And we do a lot of trade with businesses, local businesses like Grand Vines gives meals to our speakers. And so we have a lot of input that way, but it's just the three of us really. Chris does the website, Brian does the loop video and the films. We pick the films together, we find the speakers. So it's just a lot of work for the three of us. So we'd love to have another board member.
Yeah, at least one more, maybe two.
Yeah, maybe two. But yeah, and we're a very low key group. Very low key.
Yeah.
And we seem to be able to do it, but it is a lot of work.
Yeah.
So maybe
So another
that.
board member or two
Another
would be
board
helpful.
member too. Yeah. And then I was at a social justice summit at the Unitarian Church on Friday, and a woman came up to me from the Marion County Cultural Development Board and said that we should apply for a grant, that we're the perfect group that could get a grant. So that would help us pay for a lot of the films that sometimes we lose money on our film nights because we charge so low, but we want to keep our prices low because
So people can come.
people
Yeah,
can
yeah,
come.
still
'cause
bring in,
the
yeah.
economy is we don't feel it's strong enough for people to afford more than that at this point. So we end up sometimes losing money. So we depend on our sponsors who help us. We have a lot of sponsors who help us. But if we had a grant, then that might help us as well to buy these very expensive films that sometimes can be up to $1,000, $500 to $1,000 for one night, just for the film.
Yeah, well, it's kind of interesting you talk about the economy and the condition it's in now, but that's going to be kind of the topic of your December show.
Yes, it is.
And so maybe you could talk a little bit about the December show as well.
So since you have seen the film, do you want to talk about it and I can talk about the speakers?
Sure, yeah. It's Inequality for All, and it's another movie that I saw at Sundance. In fact, I think it was one of the ones that I texted
I
you
think
right
so,
away. It was
yeah,
like, we have to show this film. So it's just an interesting movie. And again, we're the Salem Progressive Film Series, so I think that kind of stereotypes our selection. But really, we've tried to get films that are just issues that we feel are happening, and this is a pretty nonpartisan movie. Like he doesn't really have a bias on one side or the other. Like he just addresses what the problem is with our economic, situation right now, and how there's this giant gap between the middle class and the upper class and the lower class. And it's just, I thought that it was a really good way of just looking at it, from a neutral standpoint and kind of observing what he thought was wrong with it. And I think it's a great film that I think everybody should see, regardless of what side you're on or anything like that. It's a film that everybody should see, I think. But, and then, tell about our speakers. We have some great speakers.
Right now we're set up to Skype Robert Reich, who actually is in the film. And then he's right now is a professor in Berkeley. And then Chuck Sheketoff from Oregon Center for Public Policy will be there as our second speaker. So that way we have somebody who's not local, but we always have a local person to talk about Oregon, what's happening in Oregon.
And because Oregon actually I find is a lot different situation than a lot of other states. I mean, the economy does revolve around natural resources a lot more than some of the other places I've lived in my past. And so it gets hit harder sometimes because of that. And
I wanted to mention, talking about our films, Brian mentioned the diversity of our films. We have films that really I don't feel like our topics should just be for progressive people. I mean, we've had films about the acidity in the rising acidity in the oceans, and that should affect everybody. We've had a film about rape in the military, and that should affect everybody. Our the soil movie affects everybody. But that's, I guess, our opinion, and everybody has their own opinion. You just assume it's going to affect everybody, right?
Yeah.
well, it does affect everybody, but some people give it a lower priority sometimes.
Right.
And because it's just interesting, like people say that they're environmentalists, but like the choices they make don't add up to being one.
I tell you what, though, I think that a lot of people that think they're on one side or the other and think that, oh, well, this is a progressive film series, then I wouldn't agree with anybody. I really would challenge them to come to our movies and check them out, because I think they'd be actually really surprised on how they might go, whoa, wait a second, I agree with that.
Right.
And that's, there's going to be some movies where people don't agree with, and you're never going to have a movie where everybody agrees with it. But I bet you it would surprise a lot of people if they thought that, oh, this is totally not what I'm about. I bet if they went, they'd be really surprised.
Well, that's the key we were talking about with the documentaries, is that at their base, they're stories. And they're stories about real people who are dealing with real issues that a lot of people throughout the country are dealing with right now. And that's not a partisan issue. That's people living their real lives. And I think, if you get someone who comes in who maybe didn't think ahead of time that they would agree with the film, just connecting with the person or the stories that are involved in the movie can kind of change the way people look at things.
Yeah, and I think now more than ever, that's kind of what we need in the community, is people to kind of just have an open mind and a discussion about things. Everything's so polar right now, and it's one side against the other, where we're hoping that just people will see these movies and at least take something from it. If nothing, just have an open mind when they get there and hear the story, and then do what they want with it afterwards.
And if nothing else, identify maybe with someone that they didn't agree with.
Yeah.
And like you said, try to close that polarization a little bit.
Right. And stay
Well,
along.
I mean, it's partially, you have to keep an open mind to things. I don't care how old you get, you really need to keep an open mind, because there are things in your life that will change how you view things. But you have to be open to new information, because if you don't, you're going to be locked into one way of looking at things, which
and that can be
might
difficult.
become obsolete.
Right. Right. It can be
And that goes for
difficult.
everybody.
Right.
That isn't, again, that's not a party issue. That's everybody. Everybody should kind of remember that. And I do think it's hard. It's always easy to say that to somebody else, but to look at yourself and say, I might fall into that category too sometimes, and try to come at it with an open mind. Everybody should, I think.
Well, and even though I think progressive people who come and see some of these films, they'll find the same. Sometimes that these challenge maybe what you believed ahead of time. I think that's a perfect example. Is that as a Fierce Green Fire, in November, is that I think a lot of people who are especially involved in the environmental movement early on will see something in this film that maybe they didn't know about, or maybe they weren't expecting to hear from a film like this. And so I think it's important for people to challenge themselves in that way.
Boy, now I'm feeling guilty about all these. Maybe I'm too close-minded about something. I'm thinking about.
This is actually an intervention.
Yeah.
This whole show is just for stage.
Well, it's kind of interesting too, because from my own background, my parents were both very strict Republicans.
So are mine.
You know, and it wasn't. And I was brought up, went to Catholic schools most of my life,
Wow.
and so it wasn't until I got to college and it was the vets coming back from Vietnam talking about their experiences there, and it didn't matter whether they agreed that we should be over there or disagreed about being over there. They all said the same thing to me. They're all against us. They would have these horrific stories about not being able to trust any of the Vietnamese.
Oh.
And I remember finally it dawned on me, and I was asking one of these guys who was a big supporter of the war, I said, well, if no one wants us there, what are we doing there? And he had to stop and think about it. And that was one of the things that, during my youth that I thought was important. We were having discussions, and some of our professors were very good about having open-ended discussions. I had this one poli-sci teacher who was a Republican who would stay after class, and this is a class that went from 3:30 to 4:30 Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. He was shocked at how many kids showed up on Fridays. 4:30 on Friday, and some of them were staying over to talk about, and it wasn't just the war, it was lots of different subjects. But he was open to listening to our discussion and pointing out things to us and like that, so that we didn't feel like idiots. But I mean, it was a good discussion that went on. And that's a little bit about what you were talking about, how things are more polarized now, because you have more sloganeering going on than actual discussion.
Right,
But
exactly.
the film series should also then be people trying to open up and think about things and not be so locked into a particular point of view. Because really when it gets down to it, it's the evidence that should weigh most heavily, not your opinion or somebody else's opinion.
Right.
But that's my opinion.
Right.
So let's see, we've talked a little bit about the next two films. And do you have anything? I think you said something about you had something in February picked out.
Well, we have the movie Citizen Coke picked in February about the Koch brothers. But we really didn't talk about where do we want to go.
That's true.
We really haven't really talked about that ourselves, I guess. This is the middle of our 7th year. I guess if we had more board members, because we all have so many diverse things that we're doing besides the film series. We do a lot of volunteering, doing other things in the community, that if we had more board members, we probably would, I don't know, can we do this till 10 years?
Oh yeah, and
Year 10?
There's always things that we want to do. We can always do more, and we've talked about different
action
goals
steps,
that we've
right.
had. Yeah,
Working
more
with
action
straw.
steps. Yeah,
Right.
and maybe even having another day where we all get together and kind
actually
of
do something.
Yeah, do some next step items where everybody's doing. Because I think what you said, some people just don't know how to do it.
Right.
I know when I 5-6 years ago, I didn't know how to call who my congressperson was, or who my rep was, or any of that. So, and I think there's still a lot of people out there that don't.
Right.
So I think kind of
An
building
action
that.
day.
Yeah. And especially we want to, and we want to draw in more young people. I
Right.
think,
We definitely want more young people.
we want everybody, but our demographic, we want to get some young blood in there too, and get them active.
Well, we're going to have to wrap up, so I'm going to thank the members of the board from the
Thank you very
Salem
much,
Progressive Film Series.
Thank you for having us.
And come back next week to the Valley View, and we'll see you then.